Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which I'm presenting to you from, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Okay, so happy Bi-Visibility Day. Today started around 1999 to increase awareness and celebrate those in our bi+ community. I'm using bi+ as a term that refers to all multi-gender attractive folk, which includes, but is not limited to, queer, polysexual, pansexual, omnisexual, and honestly, there's so many more. You can look it up, it's great. Soon you're going to hear from some members of the bisexual community here at UNSW, and they're going to uncover truths, dispel myths, and share their own bi experiences. I'm sure you all have a bunch of burning questions, so please pop them in the chat and we'll do our best to get to all of them. Just a quick content warning as well. We will be talking about things to do with sex and gender identity and sexual identity as well. So please take care of yourself. If you need to leave, that's totally cool. And we will be sending a list of supportive documents after the event. So without further ado, please welcome Leo Shaw-Voysey, who is our moderator for today's event, who is also a queer officer at UNSW.
Thanks so much, Sophie. Hello, everyone. My name's Leo. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a bi and non-binary UNSW student. I'm a fourth year Bachelor's of City Planning student. And as Sophie pointed out, I am one of this year's SRC queer officers. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm calling from. I'm calling from Gadigal land. If you know what land you're calling on from, chuck it in chat. It's always good to know and represent it. It's an absolute pleasure to moderate this panel alongside four brilliant UNSW students and staff representing our diverse and vibrant bi+ community. Before we go any further, a reminder to everyone to please keep your mic muted. This session is being recorded. However, please jump in on chat with any of your thoughts, any extra questions. We love a big, vibrant chat, so send all your comments in. And so without any further ado, let's introduce our panel. First up, we have Katia Fenton, who uses they, them pronouns. Katia is a UNSW student studying a Bachelor's of Advanced Science. We also have Serena Knight, uses she, her pronouns, is also a UNSW student studying a Bachelor of Commerce. Hi, Serena. Next up is Andrew Arena, who's a PhD doctoral research fellow from the Black Dog Institute, and Andrew uses he, him pronouns. And finally, we have Lucy Dobson. Lucy Dobson uses she, her pronouns and is an administrative assistant with the Faculty of Science at UNSW. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming along to this panel. I'm really keen to have a big, warm discussion with you all. To kick things off, let's jump into our first question, which is, how do you define bisexuality or being bisexual? And how does that relate to your own experience? Who wants to kick us off?
If it's all right with everyone, I'll. So I'm kind of here to provide a bit of a cultural perspective because I grew up in Tokyo. I was born and raised, and I'm half Japanese. So my view on sort of not just bisexuality, but I guess the LGBTQ plus experience might be a bit different from a lot of the people attending this event. So for me, bisexuality is something that I'm still kind of exploring, but I think as someone who identifies as a woman, I think it's something that I have until recently kind of viewed as within sort of the gender binary, as in I'm attracted to either men or women. Recently, I've kind of had to sort of reevaluate that for myself, but I kind of want to leave that to other panelists who have maybe a bit more of a clearer example of how they view bisexuality.
No, I totally see where you're coming from, Serena. I'm kind of the same. When I first came out as bisexual, I was seeing it as I'm attracted to both men and women, as though those were the only options. But now I consider myself as attracted to people of any gender. And I still use the word bisexual, and that word is used differently by different people. I've recently thought maybe pansexual would be a better word to use just because it avoids this idea of a binary. But I guess the only important thing to note is that bisexual doesn't necessarily mean you're only attracted to men and women. You know, there's a whole spectrum. Yeah.
Yeah, the definition that I've heard a lot is two or more, just as you can have preference for even like all genders, but men, for example, all genders, but women. And personally, just as someone who is non-binary themselves and is dating someone who would call themselves like a straight guy, I would think that sexuality is just so fluid that even if you are only attracted to two genders, there's gray area in that already. So I guess it's just so fluid to start off with.
Yeah, that's the word that you're saying there, fluid, is definitely how I think of it. I struggled to kind of fix on that, and it took me a long time to adopt the term. That was a real struggle for me, but now it fits really comfortably. And I think now that there's more knowledge around the fact that, as you're saying, that it's not, feeding into binary ideas of gender, that's really comfortable for me. I've dated a non-binary person, so figuring out how to use that term and be respectful of their gender identity was really interesting. So yeah, I think it's very fluid, and as you can obviously see, it changes for everyone and it's different for everyone.
Yeah, and Katia, I think once you said you prefer the word queer, and I'm kind of on the same page with that. I kind of just use the word queer now because I feel like it's just broad, it's inclusive.
The catch-all term.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
definitely. No, like I agree as well. Like I think like I said, originally I kind of viewed bisexuality as a very like binary thing, as in men or women. But as I kind of explored like the LGBTQ plus space, like I think definitely that fluidity kind of becomes more and more apparent.
100%. No, fantastic answers all around. I guess going into that a little further, and dating as a bisexual person, there's a lot of discussion around bisexuals and being polyamorous or non-monogamous. There's often a lot of stigma there. Lucy, do you think that bisexuals are inherently polyamorous or non-monogamous?
I think, and then this is something we've spoken about between us, but like that that idea feeds into this general idea that people have about bisexual people being sexual people. I think it's very sexualized as an identity, perhaps more so than other letters in the rainbow. So I think no, not more so than other people. But again, I'm just speaking to my experience. So I'm bisexual. I've been in a non-monogamous relationship, but I don't think that that's inherently linked to my bisexuality. So I think perhaps people that are bi or people that are queer are more used to talking about their relationships and being more open in the ways they discuss sex. So perhaps that's kind of led to this idea. But no, they're not inherently more polyamorous, I don't think, than others.
Absolutely. On that really good comment from Stephanie in chat, I've been experiencing a lot of internal conflict in regards to who I am truly in regards to am I truly bisexual, or do I need to label myself as pansexual, if I'm attracted to all genders. Glad to hear I'm not alone, and a lot of people expressing the same opinion. It's a really common experience, and it's something that definitely unites us in the bi plus community. Any other thoughts on this? Yeah.
I was just going to add to that. Like, I was really hesitant about the term bisexual. And I think, as we've all kind of said, like pan technically fits better. But I think because there is so much like biphobia and negativity around it, I actually really wanted to own that identity with a bit of pride, because I don't often hear people owning it that way. And at least for myself, queer didn't really capture this thing for me. So I definitely shied away from that label for lots of different reasons, including this, binary idea, but it's felt really good to own it. So if it feels right, I encourage you to do the same.
Yeah, I found the opposite kind of. That's why I like the term queer, because it's just you're part of the community, but it's not necessarily defining you to one thing, because I'm not sure if I'm bi, pan, omni, whatever like it is. I just know I'm in that kind of area. And so for me, sometimes bi is used as umbrella term, or queer is great. But lots of bi people that I know are confused about what to label themselves, especially since in recent years it's more the bi community has become the non-binary community has become bigger and people are seeing it more and more. And so the idea of just two binary genders is getting muddled up in a way.
Yeah, no, I definitely like agree with that, Katia. Like, I think I've had sort of what I'll cover maybe in later questions, but like one of the things that I struggled with was kind of this idea of like having friends within my like school space that were very open to like having conversations about like sexuality and sort of the confusion surrounding it, but then living in a country and also maybe like a culture who didn't necessarily have that. So like not being able to really see like real life examples, let's say, of like people who are struggling or people who are open about that conversation. So I think that's like what Stephanie brought up, like that struggle, I think is very inherent in a lot of bi people or like bi plus community.
Totally.
And I think that in the same way that your sexuality can be fluid and can shift and change over time, like the label that you use can also shift over time. And you might be more comfortable with a particular label at one time, but then later on you think, you can reevaluate that. Like your identity is not fixed. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
100%. No, well understood that our sexuality is fluid and interchangeable. Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Moving on to the next question. A perfect, you can't ask that question. Do bisexuals only date other bisexuals? Andrew, do you want to kick us off on this one?
Yeah, so at face value, it seems like an obvious answer, like, of course not. Like, of course you can date straight, like for me, I could date straight women, I could date gay men. You don't have to date bisexuals, of course. But in practice, there tend to, at least I've encountered difficulties. I've encountered some challenges in terms of dating heterosexual women. I've just found personally that a lot of people are not comfortable. A lot of women are not comfortable dating a bisexual man. And so I feel more comfortable dating queer women. And yeah, I mean, that's just personally, I just think that there's just more understanding in that way. And you have to overcome less barriers. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else has had similar experiences with that.
I've had the similar experience, but with gay women, I feel like, especially with there being lots of biphobia in the community, I find often that like gay women will kind of retract if you say that you're like bi or pan or whatever. And so personally, I found it like easier to talk to like other like bi women or like whatever label they use and not a lesbian woman, as I find often the time they kind of see you as like less gay or that like you're less likely to date them because you're just confused and you might also date a guy or a non-binary person. So yeah, that's my experience.
I also have like queer female friends who've said similar things about like other lesbian women see them as a tourist sometimes, as like, oh, you're just, experimenting and really you're straight. Whereas for men, I know others who've experienced kind of the opposite, where there's an assumption that you're gay, really you're just gay. And yeah. So it's interesting that there's a bit of a difference. Yeah.
100%. I completely resonate with that.
And I think one of the main struggles of like being bi and kind of exploring that identity is like where you can't necessarily have the conversations about your sexuality with, say, a straight person just because they might not be able to relate, but also you kind of face like a kind of, you have that sort of anxiety over facing backlash from like other members of the LGBTQ plus community. So it can be hard to kind of like explore yourself when you're constantly kind of like anxious about whether or not, I might face like negative feedback from the people that you kind of want a community from.
Yeah, you often feel that kind of caught in between, and that at least I found when I was dating a non-binary person that I felt much more comfortable and confident using the term gay because I felt solid in that. In a way, when I use the term bi, it doesn't feel the same. And that's because of all of these, connotations of either dipping your toes in one or the other, which of course is is not necessarily true for everyone. So
yeah. It's really it's really interesting how like terms really kind of shape your sort of identity, if that makes sense. Like, and especially like what you kind of associate with even like yourself, and what other people associate with you.
I think as well, it made me, I realized, I guess I didn't really have any kind of big coming out, because to me, my sexuality felt fluid, and it's made me realize like how much the label is for other people to understand something about me that I already know inherently myself. And then I have to kind of negotiate and renegotiate that label depending on who it is I'm speaking to.
But I would say also personally, as a non-binary person, the term bisexual, when I like realized that I was non-binary, I was like, is that for me? Because that was like the time when I just thought it was like just two genders, and I was like, am I being left out? But bisexuality being more fluid, as I've come to realize in later years, I think that really confused me personally. And so that term bisexual as well as confusing, I've just confused myself actually.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting what you were saying there, Lucy, about like, you know, identifying as gay and whatnot, and those terms. Like, I often get, I don't know, people often identify me as gay, for instance, and I used to really like get annoyed because I'm like, no, like I'm bi. I used to correct people, and then I stopped caring. I just gave up. And I do think sometimes it would have almost been easier to have just been able to tell people, yes, I'm gay. I think it would have just been clearer for people, you know?
Yeah.
People really struggle with this idea that that you don't fall within this one or the other, you know, that there is this gray area.
Especially when they perceive you a certain way, right? So as you're saying, people perceive you off the bat as gay, and I think on the other end of the spectrum, people perceive me off the bat as straight, which is why I took confidence in the label of gay, because it's like, if I say I'm bi, I feel like you're gonna question that because of how I see, you know.
And then you have to justify your entire sexuality to someone. I feel like I'm constantly trying to justify my sexuality to people.
Yeah. It's like, no, I am attracted to both people. Like, it is a thing. Like, it's okay.
Especially if you like seem straight or like too gay. And so it's like the classic thing of like cuffing your jeans and wearing Doc Martens. So like, you can like shout out to the world, or like shopping at Dangerfield or whatever, like shout out to the world, I'm bi, or like I'm gay and whatever. Like I found like I did that as soon as I came out. Like I dyed my hair blue, I did all the like cliche things, and
it looks great. I'm glad you did. Good too.
Yeah, nice.
Brilliant. No, really, really good discussions there. Like, we kind of gone full circle. Looking at chat, Heidi said, it's definitely easier to grow closer to others who are on the same page with you. On the same page with queer identities. So I reckon that leads to bi people to get along more and fall in love with other bi people. Absolutely. I'm sure that's something we've all experienced. I guess to sort of round off this little pocket of conversation, is there a message that us Bs in the LGBTQIA+ alphabet have? Is there a message we have for the rest of the letters in terms of some of the stigma and treatment we face?
I would say we kind of touched on this during our sort of preparation meeting, but in this YouTube series called with these two drag queens called Trixie and Katia, Trixie makes a really good point that gay people have kind of like fought for their identity, and especially gay men have fought for their identity for so long that straight people have kind of built this very strong identity of what is gay. And I'm loving the fans, but so like I mean, straight people have kind of built up this very strong gay identity, but I think also gay and lesbian communities have also then built up this very strong idea of who they are, and they're very proud of that, as they should be. But on the flip side of that is that I'm sure like many of them can feel threatened maybe by not necessarily gay or lesbian members. So say like us, bisexual members of the LGBTQ community, they might feel like it might be an infringement of that identity that we can say, oh, well, we're attracted to both. So I think if I had a message to the rest of the letters, it would be that we're not necessarily trying to infringe on anyone's identity. If anything, we're trying to build our own, and we're trying to build that with the support of the LGBTQ plus community.
Totally. Like, we love you, but my sexuality has nothing to do with you.
That's a great message for everyone, right?
Yeah.
No, I think that, like, I guess the message that I would send out, and I think it does go for everyone, is just to be mindful when you question someone's sexuality. I mean, like, try to be respectful and try to remember that this person has gone through a process to get to where they are. You know, like, all of us have faced challenges, you know, internally and externally in one form or another, right? And it's been like such a journey to get to a point where you can comfortably say, yes, I am bisexual, you know? And so when people question that, when people say, no, but aren't you really gay? Is this just a phase? It kind of undermines like an entire history that person has gone through to get to that point. It is a struggle. And so, like, I think it's just a matter of being respectful of the fact that this person has no doubt questioned that for themselves, you know, probably like ruminated over it for years. And so it's important to keep that in mind. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because it's always that question when you're bisexual, am I gay or am I straight? And that is so much a part of the problem. We need to get past that question, you know?
The thing I'd say as well, and there's a few people commenting on the phase in the chat, like, the other thing is, and this might sound a bit controversial, I don't know, but the idea of a phase is that, like, my sexuality might be fluid, and maybe that is a phase, and that's also okay. Like, it can be a phase to me, and that's fine, because again, it's my sexuality, not yours. So it doesn't invalidate it if it changes over time, you know? So I think, like, none of these things, like, just because it's not static doesn't mean it's not real.
Yeah, I think especially as someone who's only like been in long-term relationships with men, I will get often people say, oh, it's just a phase. Oh, you're just doing it because you're trendy, like, and wanting to fit in, which I find kind of funny to me, because it's like, I don't want to necessarily be in a marginalized group. So it's just interesting, the phase. Like, sexuality is definitely fluid, and I could change my mind in 20 years' time, but at the same time, it's not a phase in the way that you just picked it one day.
Yeah, I totally resonate with what you're both saying there. And that it should also, for some people, like, identifying as bisexual can be like a transitionary identity. You know, as they're figuring it out, they're like, wait, I am attracted to, you know, the same sex or whatever it is. And that's totally okay for that to happen. I think also when people are maybe challenging your sexuality, it's kind of, I always get this thought, like, why do you care so much? You know? Why is it so important for you to know, like, who I'm attracted to? Like, I don't know. I just think that I'm an open person. I'm happy to answer questions, but sometimes you're like, why are people so invested in this question of what is your sexuality? Like, sometimes I'm just a person, you know? Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah, no, like, I like how Samantha's kind of pointed that out. Like, why do we equate static sexuality with a real identity? And I think it kind of sort of speaks to people's need to kind of put things in boxes. And I think, you know, like you said, Andrew, like, clearly, like, when you're kind of questioning our sexuality, you're also questioning this whole process that we've all been through, which is kind of questioning ourselves and our validity. So having to defend that gets really tiring. So yeah, again, like, why can't you just see me beyond my sexuality? Like, I am other things other than that.
Yeah, and sometimes the questions are well-meaning, and it's okay to be curious, you know, but I think you need to come from, that place of curiosity, as opposed to like that sense of like challenging you on your sexuality. I think that's the line that sort of gets crossed sometimes.
Yeah, I think Christopher, I just saw Christopher's questions and it was great. I wanted to touch on that. I think there's two sides. There's one side, which is that, personally, I love using the term gay and queer because I think it's a really umbrella term. Using the word gay now is more of an umbrella term. And I like that because it's a community that puts all the people in the LGBT plus community together. But at the other side, I see a really powerful thing in different labels and them being like so many now. And I think it's also important as it can really resonate with you. And if you find people that share the same label, and you can find a smaller community, not just as well as larger community, who might get you on a more personal level, as opposed to because, for example, I don't necessarily understand. I'm not asexual, so I don't understand fully the asexual experience, whilst other asexuals do, and they can resonate together and things like that. So I think those labels are also really important, as you can find a little small set of community for people to commune together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's Katia. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Serena. I'll just quickly read out the question for the sake of the recording. So Christopher's asked, isn't the problem the labels we put on ourselves? As a gay man, I just want to be seen as a person. And I feel like we are adding more and more letters, which does make it harder for those outside of our community to engage. Keen to hear insights from the panel. I'll hear from all of you, and then I'll move on to some other questions.
Yeah. So actually, I think also something to acknowledge is that I think for a lot of people, these terms aren't necessarily meant for other people, if that makes sense. It's more for the individual to kind of be able to progress in the sort of journey of finding their own identity. I don't think a lot of people use it as kind of just like, again, I might be wrong, but from my personal experience, I think, even the term bi, I use that more as like a way of confirming to myself of my own sort of sexual identity of being attracted to more than one gender. But that doesn't necessarily mean I just see myself as bisexual. And I think that can kind of be a difference between more static sexualities, like Samantha mentioned earlier, and sort of more fluid sexualities that have a bit more the difficulty, I'd say, kind of securing like that sort of identity around their own sexuality.
Absolutely.
I think labels are tricky because they help and hinder. They're both useful to us because recognition is important. Like we need to recognize that we're here and we exist. Even like from a human rights sort of perspective, like by recognizing the spectrum of all the different people that exist, like it allows us to try and fight for equality and things like that. But at the same time, the comment was it Christopher, I think it was, made is really valid, that like by creating all these labels, sometimes we're just othering, we're just like creating boundaries when we should be uniting, which is why like I am all for like using the term queer, because it kind of like unites the whole community in a way. But a lot of people don't vibe with that term. And I don't know, but I think we're still figuring it out. We're still finding the best way to do it. Yeah.
No, totally.
Yeah, like coming off the back of that, right? It's so, I think use a label in a way that is like, if a label works for you and that's empowering for you, then that's awesome. Sometimes we, are forced to use labels. If you use dating apps, you'll have to pick one or multiple on there. Field's a really good one because you can pick heaps. But yeah, you can have really fraught relationships with it. And the fact that I think especially as bi people have such a mind fuck around it is, a testament to the fact that they can be problematic and tiring and othering. But I don't know, since finding my own label, so to speak, or my own identity, like that's felt good. And so I'm just kind of like holding on to that, right? If it feels good for you, then stick with it and trust in that.
Absolutely. Really great to hear lots of diverse opinions on labels. really good comments from chat. Can't get through all of them. I'm going to take us back a bit now to change the direction of conversation. Before the phrase just a phase came up, how do you know it's not just a phase? Open to the floor.
I think one of the really clear moments where I was like, oh yeah, no, I'm definitely not straight. Maybe not necessarily I am bi, but where I was like, oh yeah, I'm definitely not straight, was that obviously like love can be very different depending on the person, whether it be sexual or romantic. But I think definitely what made me realize like, oh, I'm not straight was the feeling like a deep romantic love for a woman. And I was definitely confused about it at first, because even when you have that community around you close by, like it's definitely something that like it's a personal experience, right? So it's not something that someone can 100% relate to at any given moment. But I think for me, definitely it was this feeling of like, oh, I'm in love. And I was like, and it's not with a woman, so clearly I'm not straight. Yeah.
I mean, you can always just throw the question back at them. Is your straightness a phase? Like, have you worried about that?
Very good point. Very good point.
Like, my sexuality is probably not a phase, but also I don't know. Like, how exciting! I'm pretty sure it's not.
Yeah, and also often when people say it's just a phase, is there like, well, have you been with someone of the opposite sex, like, or like, how do you know? Or like, even in my case, I kept my sexuality deep down and for a long time due to being in a church and all that. And so I think I got the question is, how do you know you're bi? Like, you haven't been with a female or you haven't been with someone who isn't male. And I think that threw me off a bit, because I was like, no, I haven't. But then I realized it just like some straight people don't date until they're like 20, 30 or 40. And so I think it's just the same thing of, you just know, like, you know, from a young age, you have crushes on like people in cartoons. Like, I know mine was Shigo from Kim Possible was my like kid awakening.
Sexual awakening.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's, you know, from a young age, but you don't figure it out till later.
Yeah. Actually, I love how Leora said I had about a 15-year straight phase, because that was around when like 13, 15 was when I really kind of realized like, oh yeah, I'm definitely not straight. But yeah, like you just don't, I think it's one of those things where it's like, you know, I always knew like, okay, well, I'm an ally, but I couldn't have imagined like, oh yeah, like I'm just not straight. I mean, again, like for me personally, like there was a bit of a cultural thing where it was like heterosexuality is definitely like assumed for everyone. And so I think I kind of internalized that, where I was like, yeah, I'm definitely straight, until it was very clear that I wasn't.
Yeah, I think like, because that question often comes externally, you know, like people asking you, is it a phase? But it also comes internally too, you know, you ask it of yourself. And I think that's a really challenging and really personal process to work through. And any one person's process is not going to be the same as anyone else's. So yeah, in terms of how you overcome that, like how do you know it's not just a phase? Time, I guess, like it becomes clearer over time. I agree that having romantic feelings for people, like not just you know, sexual attraction, but deep romantic feelings for people of both genders or different genders, was a big game changer for me. Like I always knew that I was sexually attracted to both men and women. And when I realized that, I you know, in the early years, I didn't want to be queer. You know, it wasn't something I wanted to have to deal with. I wasn't prepared for the judgment and the stigma and all that stuff. And so I was just kind of like, maybe it'll go away. And so there was that question of yeah, like this could be a phase, let's wait and see. And yeah, it became pretty clear it was never going away. And that was great. It was a great thing in the end. I'm so glad it didn't, because I feel like my queerness has made my life so much more rich. Yeah.
I think Daisy made a really good point, that kind of tying into what Andrew was saying, like, realizing you're not straight can be scary, and how did the panel nurture themselves when moving through this transition. I think it was really important for me to have a community of maybe not necessarily bi, but I had friends who were part of the LGBTQ plus community, and that really did help. But I think just internally, I think reminding myself that, what I was feeling was valid. And I think that was, that really helped in kind of, I guess, dealing with the sort of fear and the anxiety that can come with realizing that you don't necessarily fit into the norm or the standard.
Yeah,
I think that's a really good, sorry, Katia. I think that's a really good question. It ties in really well with the question I have lined up for a little later. So I might pause convo on that question. Sorry, Daisy, but we will get back to it, promise. I'll jump ship again in the interest of time, as we're flying through. This has been a really beautiful discussion so far. Thanks so much, everyone. Question I'll pose to Serena. Why is it more okay for women to be bisexual, which is often shown in media and society?
So I think for me personally, coming from a culture that was very heteronormative and sort of compet, if anyone knows that term, it's very much, there's two very clear aspects to it. So in Japan, you have this very clear distinction between your personal and private as well, and then your public lives. So people don't talk about their private lives very often. So it's kind of like different from where, like, say in the West, where you'll kind of like have friends that you talk to, like even if you're casual or like work colleague friends, you'll still talk about your private lives. In Japan, that just doesn't happen. And then there's that aspect. And then there's also this aspect where there's very clear sort of gender norms, especially for women, to be the mother, start families, and that kind of pressure is kind of constantly existing. So like there's this term in Japan called Christmas cake, which is a very awful term to kind of describe women who haven't been married past the age of 25, because Christmas cake, you buy it on the 25th on Christmas, and then it's stale the next day. So like that kind of, so there's that kind of pressure is what I'm trying to say. So those kind of pressures, so it's a bit different, I'd say, from like this attitude in the West, but at the very least in Japan, women are kind of seen as like expected to start families one day. So sort of like being close with a female and having like really deep female friendships, that's and like, physical affection between females is very normalized. So like you'll see girls in the street like holding hands and like, but the thing is that no one assumes that they're not straight. You know what I mean? So like it's very like when I said earlier, like it's very assumed that everyone is straight. That's kind of what I mean is like, and because people don't really talk about their private lives, they don't really talk about things like sexuality either. So while you don't really get like that kind of, say like blatant homophobia, you also don't get that kind of very like out and proud kind of culture that you have here in Sydney, which I was kind of really surprised by when I first came to this country, was like going around Sydney, seeing gay pride flags in Oxford Street, and like seeing men with their partners, seeing women with their partners, and being very open about it. That was something that kind of took me aback. It took me aback at first. Yeah, like Sona says, kind of Sappho and Cameron, and like, kind of they were roommates. That kind of whole idea is really, I think, a good way to describe the sort of attitude in Japan.
I was just like thinking about that idea of roommates, and obviously like that being a more acceptable narrative, like women having, you hear people be like, oh, when I was in boarding school, we did the like whatever it was. And I think it's because we're just more comfortable with women having sex with women than men having sex with men. Sorry to make that a binary thing, but in terms of like the way people think about these things, like I think that society is just more accepting of that, and that does feed back into that idea of it being a phase is that I think like when a woman like experiments with a woman, like it's experimenting and that's safe, and that doesn't mean she's going to betray her gender. Whereas I think gay sex, as in, you know, two penises, is perceived as a gender betrayal, which is just, you know, a crock of shit. But I can't speak to that as much as I'm a cis woman, so I'm going to throw that out there to someone else.
No, I think it's an interesting point. I think there's this element where if you're a man attracted to men, then it threatens your masculinity and the idea of masculinity. And I think that because men are so attached to this idea of masculinity, I think anything that threatens that is really off-putting and really, I don't know, inspires this like hostility against it, you know, because it comes from this place of like being threatened, I think. And that's why I think that, I know men who are attracted to men like are often like, you know, received so negatively. Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for the female experience, but yeah, I mean, masculinity, it's a problem.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think also like, I think it does definitely kind of tie in a bit to sexism, where it's like women aren't necessarily like, especially for women, it's like, I don't know, you're kind of not seen as like it's not taken too seriously, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, you're with a woman, but like the implicit, like you kind of they're kind of implying like you'll get with a guy eventually. You know what I mean?
Also, the fact that sometimes it can be seen through the like straight male gaze of the two girls kissing in the club to try to get the guy, or like or the straight males just like gawking at like women on women relationships, and like yeah, exactly, like
there's your answer.
There's fetishization of like of women on women, or like femme identifying people and femme identity people, and it's just like this. So it's almost like okay because it benefits the patriarchy.
Definitely.
Sure.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm gonna sorry gang, I'm gonna cut us there. I'm gonna give one more question before we go to some more questions submitted by the audience. So to round us off and try and keep your answers a little snappy here. And this links back to some earlier points made around community and the bi community. Where do we find our community? Do we go to bi parties? Are there bi clubs? Are there bi picnics? Where is our community?
Yeah, I think actually like that whole concept of like bi clubs, like I think that's another way that like bi people can kind of actually struggle to find a community, is that because we don't have this kind of static identity, like it is about like sexual identity, it can be kind of hard to really like find your place because again, I think even people, members within the LGBTQ plus community kind of see us as wanderers. So that can be a struggle.
Yeah, I would say one good thing though is shout out to Leo and the Queer Collective, is that it's a great way. That's like something where I've really solidified my identity over the past years, meaning with just like queer people in general. And within that, there are plenty of bi plus people as well. And it's just been great to be able to chat to people and like find like-minded people, because I before was like, I'm not part of the community at all. I'm very like in the background by myself and like not in the party scene, everything like that. So like the Queer Collective being that kind of society where you can get together with people and everyone's so nice. And I can see Leo just put it in the chat. It's just like that was great for me to just get that.
Yeah, I would say just meeting queer people generally, like there's so much diversity in that community that you're going to find people who, you know, like are more or less similar to your experience. But I've found a lot of reassurance just in meeting queer people of all different kinds, you know.
Yeah. Even just having this, sorry to interrupt. Just having this panel is really great. Like it's a community of like, again, I'm very happy to be here just because like, again, like it's very much like just having this is like kind of building that community.
Yeah, it's super affirming and it's super cute. I was going to make 2 points on the community thing. One, I guess, like, I found my community through going out onto the party scene, very like straightforward, and that's been really, really fun. Queer parties are amazing, but they're also not super accessible for people who don't party or are sober, and so I guess that's harder finding your community. So it is cool that stuff like the Queer Collective exists. I also think as well, just like, don't assume people are straight when you meet them and talk to them. You don't know if the person that you're meeting at the coffee shop is queer. So, you know, if you just put your rainbow lens onto everything and assume that everyone is somewhere along that spectrum, then maybe you'll be pleased at what you find. I don't know.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, everyone. So moving on, we have a number of pre-submitted questions. So audience members had the option to pre-submit questions. We've got a number. I'll get through as many as we can as we approach 6 o'clock. But one question we have is, how do you overcome internal biphobia, internalized biphobia? So I'd love for someone to give an explanation of what that is and how it arises. And on top of that, that links back really well to Daisy's question on how realizing you're not straight can be scary, and how did the panel nurture themselves in moving forward in this transition, which links much to that internal biphobia. Katia, did you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'll start. Sorry, I wasn't sure when you were pausing. Firstly, biphobia, please tell me if there's a better definition. It's just basically and especially internalized is the idea that you don't want to be bisexual. There's stigmatism against it and that it's bad or negative. And I think I was like terrified that I wasn't straight. I grew up in the church. I was always someone who was really into religion and being told all my life, oh, you're going to marry a man, you're going to serve him. I was like terrified to be like, no, I don't want to do that. Like not necessarily. And I think overcoming that biphobia was really reaching out besides in my small circle and realizing that there's other people like me, and that doing this panel was really affirming, or even like going to the Queer Collective and just realizing that I'm not alone and that I'm okay, and just also having that support network around you, especially if you're not necessarily feeling safe with your identity, and just making sure you have those services. And I'm sure, as Sophia said, she'll send out some services at the end, and those would be great. And I definitely utilized those before I came out, just to talk to people and know that I was okay, like that I'm okay with being me.
Yeah, no, definitely, like Katia, I think like a lot of, I remember having this conversation with my mom where I came out to her, and my mom's my Japanese half. And I remember I remember saying I have a girlfriend and I am bi. And I remember her saying very clearly, are you sure you won't, as in because, and I think it wasn't necessarily she was against me being bi, but she was more, I think, afraid for me, because she knew that if I wasn't straight, I would naturally face these hardships that a straight person just wouldn't. And so I think that kind of, maybe not necessarily just biphobia, but I think the most maybe anxiety inducing or scary part about just not being straight is the fact that you are not the norm, which is why having this community within the Queer Collective and beyond is so important, because that really gives you that sense of security and belonging that you might not be able to find in, say, regular society.
That identity as well is also our power, so that's something we've got to remember that too. At least for me, I didn't really have a kind of big coming out, but I would just all credit to my amazing friends, one of which is Daisy that asked that question, and another one, Rivka, who's in here as well. Like, honestly, having them just affirm it over and over to me and use whatever label I wanted, like, yeah, couldn't have got through it without my mates, truly. Having someone use a label about you without you asking necessarily, with them just knowing, is like super validating. So yeah, mates are a lot. Sorry, Andrew, I think I kind of
No, not at all. Not at all. I think you're all right, of course. Like, it's so important to have like some social support, people who you can talk to about that. But so many people are not at the place where they're ready for that, you know. And so there's a lot of things that you can do for yourself, you know, to help yourself through the questioning or the difficult times. And I think one of those things, like, if I could have changed one thing about my journey, it would have been to just let go of the binary from the beginning. Like, stop the questioning of like gay or straight or whatever it is. Just like let it be, you know, let yourself be who you're attracted to. Like, lean into the questions, you know, question your sexuality, test it, you know, experiment, lean into those thoughts, but then just like let them go and just experience. You know, I mean, it's easier said than done, of course, it's such a personal process. But yeah, I think that you have to be kind to yourself. Just stop beating yourself up about it, and just let it emerge naturally, and you'll find your you know, your place, I guess. That sounds so corny, but
no, Andrew, like, I definitely agree with you. Like, just to kind of add on to that, and I think, like you were saying, like, one of the things that I think I wish I could have gotten through a bit faster in my journey was like, instead of kind of focusing on what other people would see and would think of me when you know, I told them I was bi, or if they knew that I wasn't straight. I think I wish I would have focused a bit more earlier on my journey of like focusing on myself and like figuring out what I wanted from myself and what I was comfortable with, because I think that would have helped a lot in, like Andrew said, like, questioning yourself is natural. It's a natural part of your journey. And I think if I had done that sooner, instead of kind of worrying about what other people thought, it would have helped a lot in sort of really solidifying my comfortability with myself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so much of it comes from this need to define yourself for other people. Sorry, Leo.
Yeah. You're good. I'll just get some quick final thoughts from Katia and Lucy. We're about to hit 6. So if there's any last parting bits of advice on your journey and that you'd like to impart to others?
I would say the one thing from Lucy as well, just make sure you're not alone. There will be someone, and there is plenty of resources as well. And whilst everyone's journeys is different, we all do, many of us do go in similar paths, and you will find those people. And I think that's something that's really important. And I would say the one thing is just to find like-minded people, even if they're not bi. Just just talking to queer people and just finding your journeys together is great. It really helped me.
Yeah, I was going to say, just really leaning into the community. I'm looking at Heidi's comment in the chat of homophobic parents. Just as they can't change you, you necessarily can't change them. And it might just take time and love. And I don't have that experience, but what the others are saying here are really leaning into this community and knowing that the community will have you in one way or another. Like, there's a lot of power and a lot of safety in that. So yeah, finding your people and really building those relationships that are validating and where people do see you for who you are, like, that's really, really powerful.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks so
Daniel's
much,
reacting really well, like saying all the things that I wish I could say. You're doing a great job, Daniel.
Really great to see the advice from chat as well. Thanks so much, everyone. A massive thanks to our panel from myself. I'll hand back to Sophie in a second to close the event. But before then, I just want to again call out the UNSW Queer Collective, for any queer students who in the call, please check out the UNSW Queer Collective. It's an autonomous, safe space to meet queer people, engage in queer action, activism, events and socials. We have an autonomous Facebook group. Emails go out regularly. Please check us out. Over to you, Sophia.
Yep. Thank you again to everyone. This has been so awesome, and I'm really hoping it was informative and helpful and you learned something new. Yeah, that's all from me. Thank you so much again, and have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone. And thank you for your beautiful comments in the chat. It's really nice little read.
Yeah, thank you so much for the engagement.